Happy Friday, everyone. Welcome to the WSBA's Crypto Roundup. Today is Friday, June 5th, 2026. Ron Quaranta here with my ever-brilliant co-hosts, David Brill and Joshua Ashley Clayman. Good to see you both. Before we begin, for everyone joining us on LinkedIn Live, X, on YouTube, thank you so much for joining us. Our usual disclaimers, obviously nothing we're talking about is any sort of investment or legal advice. And really, the discussions are our own personal opinions, not necessarily the opinions of our respective organizations. David, Josh, it's been a rough week. We are approaching summer here in North America, and we are well nigh into yet another crypto winter. David, I'm really sick and tired of looking at my terminal. What's going on?
Well, Ron, it's been a brutal week in the markets, and we have a lot to unpack. Bitcoin has fallen more than 50% from its October 25 high, which was nearly 126,000, and we briefly touched a little below 60,000 today, its lowest level in months. We've had over, almost 2 billion in liquidations, a record ETF outflow week streak. And I think the biggest thing that we'll talk about in detail is that Strategy's selling the 32 Bitcoin for 2.5 million and breaking Michael Saylor's never sell narrative. Now, he has telegraphed this to the market, but it's interesting that all these things are sort of coming together after a $2.5 million sale in crypto and Bitcoin.
And David, to that point, you and I talk about how media perceives or publicizes some of what's going on. Saylor and Strategy own hundreds of thousands of Bitcoin, and they sold 32, I think it was, right? Yep. And the first news item I had seen was Saylor dumping Bitcoin or something, and there's this cascade of sell orders and options, puts. Josh, we talk about this and we text about this. By the way, for the record, everyone in the audience, if you've got questions for David or Josh or I, please put them in the chat. We'll address them as soon as we can. David and Josh have gotten more texts from me this week than they've probably gotten in a long time. Josh, what are your thoughts about the market and this kind of downtrend? Is it affecting clients and how you're having conversations with them?
No. Actually, it hasn't. I would say anecdotally, do certain friends say, oh, I wish that Bitcoin were back up at the high. I had all kinds of plans, yep. Right? But beyond that, it hasn't affected projects that I'm sure in the background, when you look at the treasuries, not talking about DATs or something like that, but just the treasuries of entities or projects and teams in the crypto space, I'm sure there is, effect. But in terms of plans to go forward with projects, or frankly, for a lot of the banks and other, the financial market infrastructure kind of TradFi crypto crossover stuff, no, I haven't seen any kind of slowdown. I just wanted to mention, or I know you guys know this, but just for the benefit of those at home, what's so interesting also about, the Saylor sell is that he had kind of previewed to the market that this was going to happen, right? Which was supposed to have, I think the word that had been used at the time was inoculate, right? So I do wonder to what extent, let me say this, why is it making headlines? Yeah, I know why it's making headlines, right? Because he said never sell. But he also said he was going to sell, right? And so I think we also have to think about who benefits from having these kind of announcements trumpeting, the sky is falling. Because 32 Bitcoin does not mean the sky is falling.
So Josh, to that point, I look, no one that we speak to and no one in the industry that we know is abandoning ship despite price action. David, you and I have had this conversation. I'll go a bit cynical today. I don't know why I'm in cynical mode, but there is a contingent certainly in the media world or in the ecosystem that wants to exacerbate what they perceive to be negative trends or negative news. Hence the headlines of Saylor dumping Bitcoin. He promised he'd never dump Bitcoin. And look, and the industry has its challenges. It doesn't really need some of the negative press that it's seen. David, you brought up something earlier. We've got to cover macro. We've got to cover regulatory and legislative. But the news item that jumped out to me, and David, you brilliantly highlighted this in the green room, was really the cybersecurity concern. Do you want to talk a little bit about that? Because I think we need to address that for the audience.
Yeah, and I think the hot take is that crypto doesn't have a quantum issue, we have a cyber issue.
Yeah.
And I think a lot of that comes from the number of DeFi hacks we've had. But in particular with Zcash, somebody ran a search on Claude. And Claude uses different models. So the newest model is Opus 4.8, or one of the newest ones. And Claude basically somebody used Claude to run an Opus 4.8 search on the Zcash blockchain, and they found a vulnerability that existed for 4 years.
Yeah.
And this came, even though it was patched, and it doesn't seem like anyone exploited it, when this came out in the marketplace, it led to a savage dumping of Zcash, and it's down, almost 40% today. But I think what's happening is that, crypto has become into the mainstream, and it's become like very institutionalized, and different institutions are testing it for DeFi or for other things. But unfortunately, these cyber issues keep popping up. They popped up in the DeFi, you had Kelp DAO, and now here with Zcash. And, it's a double whammy for Zcash because it's also, a well-known privacy coin. So if there are vulnerabilities in a well-known privacy coin that a lot of people use, well, you can imagine what the knock-on effects are. So it sounds like at a minimum that every team right now, even though they've done audits, a lot of the blockchain teams have done audits, everyone really needs to start using AI and testing their own blockchains and make sure they don't have vulnerabilities.
Yeah, and David, I don't want to minimize the audit work that has been done in the industry, but I would you agree that, for everyone in the audience, Claude, Anthropic's latest version, Opus 4.8, which is pretty sophisticated AI, you would think that at this point, leveraging AI for cybersecurity checks is a must for everyone in every industry, not just crypto.
Yeah, look, I think it's table stakes. And, it does unfortunately make you have to question the level of the audits that are being done of blockchains that have been done previously, if these kind of errors are coming up and in sort of more routine, searches on AI. So, we may have an audit issue as well as a cyber issue, and that the audits aren't as complete as we'd like them to be. And look, I'm not an engineer, and I can't speak to it on a super granular level, but I have looked at blockchain audits before, in a legal capacity. And, the Opus search that was run was very generic. So it is something I think, look, all of us who counsel our clients, really, this is something to be mindful of.
I'm the guy who's still using Claude or OpenAI or OpenAI ChatGPT to do searches. So I need to step up the game on AI. Josh, I cut you off. Go ahead.
No, you didn't cut me off. I was just like waiting for my moment. So, some of what this brings to mind is if you think back years ago, Penn Law and Penn Engineering, and I believe Wharton had put together a piece that was called Coin-Operated Capitalism. And what it focused on was the ICOs, it was post-ICO boom, and trying to match up the promises that were made in a white paper with the code, right? And whether there were differences. And there were a lot of differences. So just saying that. But also I recall a friend who is a very well-known computer science professor saying something along the lines of, and no offense to anyone who, this is not intended to be offensive, but he was saying that some of the many, in his view, of the tokens and the development that had been done in connection with the ERC20 tokens and the ICOs, he said that they would have been C students in his class. And that has stuck with me because it was, obviously effective enough that it, was good for capital raising for these projects, subject to all the things we've seen and the risks and, the regulatory hair and everything else. But it does make me think in this era of AI and other kinds of, attack vectors, if it really is C student work, the AI isn't a C student anymore.
Yeah, Josh, it's a really good point. By the way, David, did you catch that plug that Josh threw out there that her friends are famous people in the world?
I mean, so
Did
were
you,
you guys.
it was
You know,
very
I,
elegantly stated that the world famous computer scientist that she know. I'm
oh
totally,
well, I was trying not to like identify, and
I'm
so
with you.
I was trying to use vagaries. But I mean, yeah, I didn't mean that. I was saying that for those at home, just so they
I'm
knew it wasn't just like a random person, you know.
Josh only hangs out with famous people is what I'm trying to say here.
Oh.
David, Josh, I'm totally kidding. David, Josh, it's a really good point, and let me make this plug. We launched our AI on quantum working group. This is absolutely part and parcel of the agenda of events and thought leadership sharing that we're planning to do, and I think it's really, really important. David, I wanted to come back to one other thing if I could, because I'm really struggling, and this is the mistake I make at every one of our live streams. My price monitor is still up to my right, and it's just really getting depressing. David, let's go back to market dynamics if we could, and our old bugaboo, which drives me and you, and I think Josh bananas at this point, is market data, particularly economic data associated with the jobs report. The jobs report came out today. It was a blowout. I think the U.S. added something like 172,000 jobs. The estimate was supposed to be like, David, correct me if I'm wrong, less than half of that. April got revised up. I just keep wondering who is looking at this data, where is this data coming from, and why does it swing markets so badly? David, I've got some thoughts, but I wanted to hear from you first.
Well, I mean, there is such an irony that positive job numbers, which should be better for our economy,
Yep.
The reaction is that markets sell off and treasuries go up. So there is an irony to all of that. I mean, but that's market dynamics, and we've talked about that before. Look, I think, and I'm not the first person to say this, but there's a lot of quantitative models out there and quantitative trading. And I think when certain, data points are plugged into these models, the model's reactions are to sell. And that's what we're seeing. So I think we're seeing programmatic selling. Look, we have a lot of interesting crosswinds going on. But the main thing I think is that people worry that with a strong jobs report that interest rates may be raised. And I think that's a really major concern. And we've talked about liquidity.
Yeah.
We've talked about higher interest rates. But now it looks like 125 basis point raise has been factored in for this year. And that's clearly contrary to sort of what we've heard the administration talk about, looking at lower interest rates. And then we know what that effect that has on stocks and crypto when rates are raised.
So, guys, I have a question because I haven't looked at it closely yet. Although, because
you know what that means. We'll get the text messages over the weekend after she does review it, David.
Well, I'm hoping that you guys, I believe that you guys probably know the answer to the question that I'm going to ask, although not to put you on the spot. But in terms of the types of jobs, I know in the past, under the prior administration, David, you and Ron had talked about, there were a lot of part-time jobs, there were a lot of government jobs. In terms of these jobs that have been added and this massive number of jobs beyond expectation, do we have a sense of what kind of jobs these are? Are these white-collar full-time jobs? Are they, in the private sector, public sector? Like, what's going on?
I have to apologize that I didn't peer into the specifics of the jobs report this morning, so that's my mea culpa. David might have.
Yeah, I did. I wanted to just emphasize a point I made before and just tie the dots, connect the dots for people. When you have jobs are strong, the Fed can't cut rates and rates stay high. And with treasury yields over 5%, ETF outflows continue. And people are going to put their money in treasuries when they can get, a risk-free 5% return. And so all of this together, Bitcoin stays under pressure. But I think the one thing that's important, it's not just a crypto story, it's a macro story.
Yep.
And I think until the macro story changes, it's going to be hard for the crypto story to change. So I think I wanted to tie it together for our listeners in a way I think that's hopefully digestible. I wanted to answer to your point. I think what we're seeing is the high paying white collar jobs being replaced by hospitality and healthcare, And I think those jobs aren't as high paying. They aren't as high paying as the white collar jobs that we've seen, cuts from major companies. Look, job creation is important no matter how. I think the question is, in 1 or 2 months when we see revisions, have we had this major market reaction off of numbers that end up getting revised and maybe revised downward? And so that's really a problem. And we're seeing more revisions coming in.
And David, just to add to that real quickly for the audience, for those who are not economists, in the audience, the reason the Fed can't lower interest rates when they get job numbers like this is it spurs inflation. And there's an ongoing concern about inflation, particularly given the crisis in the Middle East, given oil prices, given supply chain disruptions. And I had seen certain articles today, David, Josh, that had pointed out that the tipping point is approaching, meaning for a long time, the conflict with Iran, oil prices was going to be, and I hate to use the word, David, it reminds me of the Fed, transitory. If this keeps going much longer, it will not be transitory. It will become systemic, which really blows a hole in, being risk on and interest rates coming down. And Kevin Warsh now has the hardest job in the world because everyone expected him coming in, reducing interest rates, and the reasons to possibly reduce them are going away rapidly, David.
Yeah, it's look, again, I'm going to reiterate one other thing. It's just, this is the paradox that crypto investors, have to understand. In the short term, bad economic news is often good for crypto because it increases the chances of rate cuts and looser liquidity. Good economic news is often bad for crypto because it delays cuts. So we're living through the paradox in real time right now. And the labor market is resilient and the Fed can't cut. And Bitcoin is down, 50% from all-time highs. I think that, along with the conflict in the Middle East, are all directly correlated.
Yeah.
So just a question, guys, again, like, no worries if you haven't thought about this. And this may be something where you're like, yes, of course this exists, Josh. But I'm wondering, is there some kind of index or something that exists that shows, like, so to your points about the replacement of white collar jobs with some lesser paying hospitality jobs or things like that. As we look at these month over month changes, is there some kind of matrix somewhere that says, like, okay, as of this date, here's the composition of the workforce, and that we could compare it against, say, like a prior year and say, look, we have more jobs now, but in the aggregate, people make less, or something like that? Or, like, is there something like that?
And there is a lot. She opened Pandora's box on Bureau of Labor Statistics data. And Josh, we love you. I assure you will regret going down this road. There's a lot of
the guides. I'm like, just like, close my eyes. Like,
you're going to get a lot of text messages this weekend. Well, I mean, look, very broadly, David, you and I have chatted about this. There are, beyond inflation data, beyond the jobs data, and the peeling down of the specifics in there, there is unit productivity measures. There is unit labor costs. There is hourly generalized. I'm screwing up, David. There are quite detailed statistics that talk about the unit productivity costs per worker in particular industries. It talks about whether or not pay is keeping up on an inflation-adjusted basis. So yes, there's a lot of data that parses through who's making this money, who's getting these jobs, what are they getting paid? Are they getting paid less on an inflation-adjusted basis? But it brings me back to another issue that we've raised, which when David and I and you, Josh, talk about these jobs numbers get recast every year, then it's the revisions, and inflation data gets revised every year. It's also the underlying data that gets revised.
Yeah.
The accumulation of that data is the same systems, and to me, I struggle with how accurate they are or aren't. David, go ahead. I'm sorry.
And I did a quick search while we were talking, and so what I think there's a double whammy here is that 172,000 jobs were created in May. March was revised up 29,000, and April was revised up 64,000. So it looks like the labor market is stronger than anyone had thought. And the Fed stays on hold, Bitcoin stays under pressure, and the macro headwinds, including what's the conflict in the Middle East, gets stronger. So I think and we can talk about other things too, but I think hopefully this is helpful to like connect the dots and see the different, inputs and how they all interrelate.
So another question, guys. In your crystal balls, your
He had a
respective
lot of coffee today.
crystal balls. Yeah. I mean, I've got more behind the screen. um, do we see a pop if and when we get clarity passed?
She went there too. It's a really good point. I mean, I've got to assume, David, I'd love your thoughts as well. I feel like the magnitude of what that pop would have been if clarity were passed is coming down the more we see some of this economic change. If we talked about this two months ago, if clarity gets passed, rocket ship emojis, and that we were getting all of these, Bitcoin's going to break 100K. With the economic backdrop that we see now, I'm not sure there's a reason for it to go that fast, that high.
Boy, I'm really of two minds here, Josh. One of the things that I have been thinking about is that maybe we would see things fall off before clarity got approved, so that institutions could now offer products at lower price points and it would be more attractive for customers to buy. But I don't know if that's a narrative in search of a reality with what's going on the macro level, or vice versa, like causation and that kind of comparison. But I do think if and hopefully when clarity gets approved, we will see different market participants get involved. But I think the big question is right now is, who are the buyers right now? I think that is really the question. We know who the sellers are. We have to think that the debt companies are not buyers right now. They might be, hopefully they're neutral, and maybe there's some of the sellers, and that's why we're seeing these liquidation cascades. But who's buying? It looks like retail is not buying right now. Hard to tell if any institutions are buying, but who's buying? And maybe this is the time where we hear about a Bitcoin strategic reserve in the US with prices depressed.
Right.
But we'll have to see about that.
Yeah. David, from the conversations that we have, you're right. Institutions aren't buying, and retail doesn't candidly have a reason to buy. They can get alpha in the equities market. They can go GameStop their life away. It's just, what's the reason for going into crypto given some of the volatility and given some of the returns outside of crypto?
Look, the AI stock returns are really eye-popping, and they're easier to quantify. I mean, the ratios may not be easier to quantify, but the earnings per share are easier to quantify, and they all keep beating their earnings estimates. So I think, whether it's hot money or whether it's people who are gambling or whether it's retail just looking for a better option for their tech portfolio, I think all those things are just leading a lot of that liquidity to go into AI stocks, even though those are selling off a little bit too, like we talked about with it being a macro story.
David, Josh, sorry, Josh, did you have another question?
Not right now. I'm sure I have many up my sleeve.
No, because I'd love to dive into that a little bit more, because you've been talking about the AI trade. David, Josh, we discussed this a lot. I know I sound contrarian, David, because everyone's saying it's different than the 90s because there's real revenue, there's real growth here. Some of the prices are parabolic, right? When you look at some of the AI trade. S&P 500 hitting all-time highs 5 days in a row, I think. I know I might be messing that up. Parabolic price adjustments, when they revert to mean violently. And that's what I'm worried about. Can you tell me if I'm wrong, or what your thoughts are?
Well, look, I agree with your premise. The thing is that you have stocks and I'm only calling these out. Again, we're not like giving trading advice or investment.
No investment advice.
But, you have Micron that's reporting, $100 a share EPS. And I think it trades at 1,000 right now. That's a 10 PE.
Yeah.
A fast growing stock with such robust earnings, probably normally more closer to 15 to 20, maybe even 25.
Yeah.
So in some cases, some of these, stocks are historically undervalued. So I think it's different because there's such earnings in some of these companies. And I just think that as we continue to grow, if the demand for AI continues at the pace it's going at, I think these companies will look like bargains a couple of years from
Mhm.
now. Just in this moment, it feels very frothy.
And frothy is the word that comes to mind a lot. David, I agree. In the long term, I agree with you. In the medium term, I agree with you. AI will add trillions of dollars of value. It just feels, SpaceX puns aside, rocket ship price activity always makes me a little
Yeah.
leery. I mean, Josh, the Clayman family office has got to be buying into this all day long, right?
All day long, Ron. All day long. No, but I mean, it is an interesting question because if you think about like that cycle and it has like hype and like all and like the hype cycle, whatever it's called. Um, on one hand, you may say, okay, well, there's a lot of hype, but there really seems to be a lot of change too. I mean, and just different situations. I mean, people, and this is anecdotal, of course, but like people in my own family who are contemplating potentially doing something different or like looking into a new career. I don't want to be too specific because I don't want to give them away. They are not very famous people. Let me just be clear. But
they are now.
But yeah, I mean, part of the calculus here, the calculation is to say, well, how is AI going to disrupt this? Like you can imagine if you're like someone who is a computer engineer, a computer scientist, a developer, you're looking into like, well, what am I doing? If you're looking to become a lawyer, right? Unless you're going to be a trial lawyer in the court, standing up and, defending, I was going to say criminals, but alleged criminals or something like that, right? Yeah, or like prosecuting, like just in real time, things are changing so much. And I do wonder what we're going to see with summer programs at law firms and all kinds of other changes because, large clients are reaching out with very specific questionnaires saying, tell us at a granular level how you're using AI to lower our costs.
Yeah. Josh, It's a really good point. Can I add one thing to that? So I had a conversation with a VC recently, and we talked about some of the things we're talking about here. It's to me, it's a little frothy, parabolic prices increases, and this gentleman noted to me the point you were both making, which is how we do what we're doing and the growth of the economy is radically changing. And the takeaway comment really was inspiring to me, which was there has never been a better time to start a company in this country and globally. And it may not look like it, and it may be volatile, and it may be the prices may be going through the roof, and there will be adjustments downward. But his premise was, in human history, there's never been a better time to start a business, which was really inspiring in a way.
Well, you know what? I think the cost of creating a business is so much lower now.
100%.
Right. You can create your own websites. You can create your own marketing. There's so much that you can do now that was costly and time consuming that you can do really rapidly. Look, I think we're going to see major productivity gains in the next couple of years. And I think my view right now is that the youngest layer of workers are going to be the most impacted. And I think it's going to be essential that younger workers coming into the market, really are able to prompt, are really able to be facile with AI in a way to really enhance the jobs that they'll be performing. I think that'll be table stakes.
Yeah. And I think the Journal had an article, I think it was the Wall Street Journal, David, to that point, that noted that the coming graduating classes will be the first generation where AI is a part of their everyday.
Yeah.
That is stunning to me.
I wanted to add one anecdote. I had a conversation with a friend of mine, Eric, here in Florida, and he was telling me that his company was having trouble getting Dell computers. They needed desktops, and they were having trouble getting Dell computers because of the memory chips. And so, when we have a severe shortage of memory chips. And so that's one area where you see that just, is accelerated, like Micron and other companies. And there's just a real need for these things. So that's another reason why I think it's different than what it was in the tech boom.
Yeah.
So he's a PC guy. He's not a Mac guy. You know that, David.
I mean, I think his company is a PC company. So like a lot of companies still are. A lot of law firms, I think almost all of them are PC based, as I remember.
Yeah. I mean, that's been my experience. What I would say though is even though, like for those at home, I think you guys agree with this, but if you don't, please tell me. Like, even though it may be like the newest generation of workers that will be, immediately the most affected, I really think that before we know it, if we who are already in the workforce do not catch up, we're going to be like, I don't know if I'm sure you guys recall people when you started out who like they'd been in their roles for a long time. They couldn't do an email, like they were still dictating into tapes to hand to secretary, to type up, and then so I think nothing wrong with that, by the way, and I think voice to text is pretty amazing. So sometimes I use that.
Everyone I know uses voice to text, by the way.
Yeah, sorry, or like guys. Just even on like a for Word sometimes if I'm just gonna do something quickly. But yeah, I think we all risk very quickly becoming that person, right? So I think it's important that everyone, wherever you are in the workforce, that you're not just like, oh yeah, that AI stuff, I don't need to look into it, because it's eating everything.
Yeah. Josh, privately, I'll tell you both a story at some point in the future about a conversation I had, I can't believe I'm going to say this, in 1989 on Wall Street. And it was a very similar, Ron, Wall Street's never going to change. You don't seem to understand conversation. And that didn't go well for that person. Josh, it's a really good point. We have to be adaptable. And I make the same argument about AI, Josh, that I may have made to both of you. And I think we all agree about blockchain is we'll know it's arrived, quote unquote, when we stop talking about it. Because it's just part of the everyday of what we do. And Musk has this really interesting take that computing as we know it will simply be everything that we use will be an edge device in a world of AI, which is a really interesting take.
Yeah. I mean, I think that I don't think any of the three of us are going to be called Luddites, which is, I think, the word you were looking for. But look, I think there will be a technological divide between people who have the capability to use new technologies efficiently and effectively, and those who struggle at that or aren't able to. And I think the people who are able to use it and be really productive using it will benefit in the workplace. I mean, I will go so far as that I would predict in a few years that part of like college's core curriculum will have a class on like prompting and sort of AI essentials for the workplace.
Yeah.
I could see that being like part of a core curriculum.
I'll be honest. I think I've seen prompt engineering courses in some schools already.
Yeah.
David, Josh, I wanted to go a little bit, first of all, for everyone in the audience, thank you so much for joining. You've all been quiet today. If you've got comments or questions for David or Josh or I, please put them in the chat. I want to go international, David. We had a wonderful comment from one of our viewers that we don't do enough international focus. And I did a little research today. And apparently in South Africa, the High Court ruled that crypto is money. And I thought of all of our banker friends in the US and in Europe who probably would have fallen over had they read that headline. But Josh, it makes me think about how interesting the different jurisdictions are and how differently they play in this space. We don't talk about international enough. I know there's a lot of going on in stablecoins in Europe. Josh, how many of the conversations that you have are international? And does some of this bubble up to the surface for you? Like crypto is a fascinating conversation to me.
So I would say probably the majority of conversations that I have about crypto, except when they're in very specific targeted situations, are international. I mean, certainly, at my firm and, if I look at clients, right, they're not, it's very important what's happening in the rest of the world, not just for companies or projects who may be pursuing strategies in multiple jurisdictions, but also because the roadmaps that other jurisdictions have set or are following, they affect and are affected by other jurisdictions. So if we think about MiCA, for example, which obviously was I don't want to say a first step, but they were like a first mover in many ways in terms of market legislation, apart from places like Gibraltar and others that have had jurisdiction specific or principles based guidance for a long time. And one of the things that that Mika left out intentionally was DeFi, right? And so when we look at Clarity and people saying, well, look, maybe we should leave out DeFi, right? Because DeFi is new, and that's the approach that Mika took. Well, now we have, a new Mika consultation coming, and people are raising again the topic of whether and how, if so, how DeFi should be addressed. So I just use that as an example. In some of the conversations that I've been having with people, now what's interesting coming up, given the shift in the US focus and with the current administration seeing that it's important to be leading in crypto, a lot of what is animating some of these conversations in various jurisdictions is a question also of how, apart from whether this is what we should do, how will this affect our competitiveness? Mm-hmm. And I think we see that in the EU, we see that in the UK, we certainly see that in the US, we see that in lots of different jurisdictions around the world. But I think that is a really interesting development, because years ago, I think it was, even if you think about Mika and how it sort of came to pass, like one of the driving forces was Facebook's announcement of Libra.
Libra, yes.
Right? Yeah. So I think a lot of times in the past, there were some jurisdictions that wanted to be, havens, or, and I don't mean that in a bad way, but I mean like wanted to attract crypto and related projects. But now I think there's a much bigger push by major jurisdictions to say, like, okay, so what do we want to do? And how will this affect our competitiveness in terms of being a place that crypto wants to live?
And Josh, we will certainly spend a little bit more time. We do have a lot of our members are stateside, but we certainly have members overseas, UK, Europe, Singapore. We'll spend a bit more time talking about the different regions, because it's important as a part of the global conversation. David, did you want to add something?
Yeah, I do. And I really want to amplify what Josh was saying. And I don't think the geopolitical crypto story gets enough attention. And like we were talking about, like while we're waiting for clarity to navigate the US Senate, EU has Mika, Singapore has Project Guardian, and Dubai has Vera.
Yeah.
And I think institutional capital isn't waiting for perfect regulatory conditions. It moves where the rules are clear. So every week that goes by that we're not seeing clarity approved, institutional capital is trading, whether it be in Frankfurt and Singapore or somewhere else. So it really is a competitive issue for us, and one, that it matters.
Yeah. David, Josh, go ahead, Josh. I'm sorry.
I wanted to mention one thing, although I don't want to change the topic, Ron, if you were going to weigh in on the same thing. Okay. So one of the things that I think is interesting, amid the backdrop of some of the more public arguments between crypto and TradFi relating to Genius and Clarity in respect of Genius, right? So the treatment of stablecoins, it has been announced, I believe, today, although if it came out yesterday or something like that, check my facts, right? But several banks, including reportedly JP Morgan, Citi, and Bank of America, are on a shared tokenized deposit network, which I believe had been reported as being targeted for a mid-2027 launch. And some are saying that is a response to the growing market share of stablecoins. So I think, to your point, the pace at which we actually get this kind of clarity and the outcomes of some of the disputes and bits of controversy, people are and businesses and players are taking action.
Josh, really well. By the way, David, I don't know if you noticed, that literally was where I was going next, and I'm pretty sure Josh has this mental mind reading capability that is actually a little terrifying at this point, but Josh, definitely a good point. So let's talk about that, and let's wrap up with that, because I think it's important. You bring up the news, I think it was from yesterday or today, you're right, Josh, about major money center banks getting together to do their own tokenized deposits. And one of the news articles I had seen on it was really interesting, David. It said to counter the threat of stablecoins. So here we are again, where it's a zero-sum game from the perspective of some in the banking space, or at least how it's reported. My argument's been that it is not a zero-sum game. And I'll argue at some point, whatever they're putting together will actually connect with and be on-ramps for stablecoins. But David, What is that a true dichotomy?
Look, I think that Jamie Dimon had some colorful words to say about Brian Armstrong in an interview that I think everybody's heard, and so I won't replay the words. I think that there is a view that, whatever form this legislation takes, that stable coins are now going to be competing with the fractional reserve banking that we have. Now, it may not be in a significant way because, how many people are going to be leveraging the crypto rails, but when you saw SoFi create their own stable coin and offering it to their customers, I think people are seeing, what's coming, and they're, planning ahead on how to either compete with it or, like you said, this dichotomy or offer, a tokenized deposit option. So look, I will say this, like, if we think about it from a consumer standpoint, like, competition is a good thing.
Yeah.
So
Exactly.
if we're in a world where customers, can get more interest for their money, whether it be holding stable coins or whether it be tokenized deposits, that's like a net plus for consumers and a net plus for, society on the whole. So sometimes, you want to get to the result and it can be a bumpy process. But if we get to that place, that's good for everyone. And look, I think
100%.
20 basis points on interest on your money is just not sustainable when inflation is 4% or 3%, or maybe it's 6%. Who knows what it'll actually be at the end of the year. So these are really important things to keep in mind. And so I think if we can all, as a society, benefit from this, or at least in the US benefit from this, it's, a little bit for the greater good, depending, notwithstanding how we got there.
Yeah.
So may I double click on that a little bit?
Oh.
Because that's exactly where my mind was going. But if you're a consumer, this is a win. And I also would just note, when we're talking about what the defense is here to this takeover by stablecoins, we're talking about tokenized deposits. Tokenized.
Yeah.
Right? So it isn't, to my mind, divorced from crypto and,
Right.
and the technology, right? It literally is tokenization. So I think, to both of your points, again, like, we're getting there. This is becoming more and more pervasive, whether it is, I don't know, I guess people aren't talking about things that aren't tokenized happening, right? So we at least have I'm not saying that they're not talking about it at all, but I'm saying when we're looking at stablecoin versus tokenized deposit,
Yeah.
we still are seeing advances, even in the fact that shared ledger. And I also think Wells Fargo may be involved in it. I don't want to leave anyone off, but right. But yeah, it's tokenized, or it will be tokenized.
To that point, Josh, you make a really good point, because it was years ago, but it feels not too long ago, where if you would have spoken about tokenized deposits, people would have said, banks would have said you're crazy. We don't need that. So to your point, we've come a long way. One last thing to add to that, David, Josh, and I'd love your perspectives on this, is this kind of collaboration with major money center banks for tokenized deposits. Is this sort of the answer to an anticipated loss, quote unquote, because clarity might actually pass? Or am I being too political about it?
No, I think it's twofold, Ron. I think it is a strategy regarding, stable coins, but also remember, tokenized deposits are another way to free up collateral.
Yeah.
And the freeing up collateral, is a really big deal for banks, because instead of having collateral trapped overnight for transactions, with tokenized deposits or other means that we've talked about, you can settle much quicker. You can settle the same day, and collateral can be reused for other transactions. So, this isn't all about benevolence. There's definitely benefits for the banks too, but I am happy if the consumer can benefit from it too, with getting higher interest on their dollars.
Josh, go ahead.
So I have a thought about that, which is, even if clarity doesn't pass, okay, let me say that. But if clarity doesn't pass, then Genius stays. And Genius does have that feature or bug, depending on how you look at it, or loophole, depending on how you look at it, about stablecoins, right? And the yield that can be provided. So if that doesn't get plugged by the by a compromise in the Clarity Act or some other way. For example, as we've talked about in the past, the OCC's questions about rules and whether it should go further, right? In terms of, but if that stuff doesn't get plugged somehow, then guess what? I guess what I'm saying is, if Clarity passes, yes, maybe that's a driver for why they do this. But if Clarity doesn't pass and there's nothing to plug what the banks may see as a loophole, then it's another reason to move ahead.
Yeah. Right? David, Josh, good point. We're just about out of time. I'm just about out of water. I swear this is only water, Josh and David. What do you guys have coming up next week? I'll be loitering around in New York at a couple of events with our dear friends at Luca. What about you guys?
I'm headed back to Florida. I'll be watching the NBA finals with interest. Also, I'm really going to be following the markets. I think the close today is going to be very interesting. I think if we close below 60,000, this weekend could be very, very turbulent in the crypto markets. So that, and one other thing I noticed is that I know we talked about a while ago when FTX went through bankruptcy that a lot of locked Solana was sold at a discount.
Yes.
Well, Solana right now is trading below what those sold locked Solana were trading at, in 2022, 23.
Wow.
So just another data point. I'm really going to be doing a lot of reading and looking forward to a very competitive NBA finals.
David, very nice. Josh?
So I'm not really sure what I have coming up in the next week. I need to look at my calendar. But I was in Paris this week. Yeah, I was in Paris this week for Proof of Talk, and my my firm and our, as people may know, we're planning a combination with another firm. So my firm, Perkins Coie, is planning to do a combination with Ashurst. And so we had our first event, like joint event, which was a fintech and crypto dinner, and that was really fun and a great success. So I'm super excited, and having met now some of my my friends over there, my new friends over there, I'm really excited to see, like, I don't know, that's kind of where my mind is, like thinking like all of these like synergies and stuff. So who knows what I'll be doing next week though.
David, Josh, I will be likewise doing a lot of reading. By the way, David, as an aside, Bitcoin's attempting to sustain over 60. It's up almost 1.2% in the hour. I got to make this terminal go away. I can't keep doing this to myself. David, Josh, I've been thinking about two things, and I would love to dive into one of them at our next session if you're both comfortable with it. I want to dive into perps, David. I think it's important for us to begin to really peel back the layers of what's important there, particularly when we look at news on what CFTC is potentially moving forward with. In the United States, they're pretty widely available globally. I keep finding myself looking at Hyperliquid, David, although I'm not allowed to use it. No one here is. My argument is that it'll be an important part of global financial markets in the future. And I'm writing a paper because I truly apparently don't want to sleep. And this paper is on an esoteric topic, autonomous financial markets.
Oh, interesting.
Which is going to be the death of me. But there's a lot of interesting kind of forecasts of what financial markets will be in the future. You will both get an advanced copy of that, obviously, but that's going to be a good chunk of my weekend over a bottle of wine. David, Josh, thank you both so much. For everyone in the audience, thank you so much for joining us. If you have additional questions for David or Josh or I, info@wsba.co. Have a great weekend. We will be back next week. Take care, everyone.